from your grave.
One of the most iconic Sega arcade games of all time. This is Alter the Beast, which was originally released in August of 1988. It is ridiculous to assume, if you have searched for this video, that you wouldn't know what Alter Beast is about. But very briefly, the game is set in ancient Greece, and you have been chosen by Zeus to rescue his daughter Athena from the underworld. The game is a fairly short one compared with others and features just 5 stages. The aim is to collect 3 orbs, which in turn transforms the player into a beast, a different one for each stage. Then finally a boss awaits you once you collected all 3 of these per stage. The game is loved by many and was a big success for Sega back in 1988 and quickly became a product of pop culture and remains in contemporary pop culture today. As always, massive and successful arcade games became riddled with a plethora of home computer and console ports of the time. I apologise if there is missing ports as always, but we'll look at the main systems nevertheless. Of course, sequels or reboots will not be added in this video. Here we go.
Welcome.
Despite looking very good with an undeniably great sim-sounding soundtrack along with sound effects, the Amstrad CPC version of this game takes slow to a whole new level entirely, to the point in fact where there is no point in playing this version at all. It is very clear that Activision were taking a bit more than they could chew with this conversion. Either that or just like many arcade conversions, this was a product of being rushed out too early. Scrolling is horrendous, gameplay is horrendous. In fact, let's just forget this whenever it existed and move on. Quite possibly one of the ugliest games for the Commodore 64. Released in 1989 by Activision, it features no music, sound effects which are pretty much mediocre. Gameplay is horrendously slow pace, which makes collecting power-ups to transform very time consuming, especially if the enemy holding one runs away from you. Severely over pixelated and yeah, just an absolute bore to play. No introduction. My brother bought this for the C64 back in the day. He rarely played it, neither did I. It obviously didn't make much of an impression. At times, hitting zombies seemed to take an eternity to defeat too. Most normally die after 2 to 3 hits. Every now and again I found myself hitting for around 20 times. No exploded limbs for the C64 conversion either, just a real dull, totally forgettable port from Activision here. Now, if you have never seen a ZX Spectrum game before, don't let this conversion put you off. This big heap of colourful mess is known as Colour Clash, where characters adopt the colours displayed behind them. The Specky is known for this, and in the past 10 years or so, I have absolutely loved the Spectrum, so much so that I managed to grab a Spectrum by Retro Games Limited before they sold out this year, and for Christmas I'll be building a brand new Specky from scratch using different new parts. Anyways, why I have ranked this colourful mess over the C64? Easy. Though this can be a little wearing on the eye, behind this is a fairly fast scoring game, complete with combined music and sound effects. Yes, absolutely far from amazing by any means, and there is no transformation scene when collecting the 3 orbs, but that was a territorial risk of being a microcomputer user back in the day. This version was brought to you again by Activision in 1989. You will see similarities with the ZX Spectrum port which I've just covered with this MSX conversion. Although the MSX version is much more pleasing on the eye by far, the music is also very nice in this version too. It just reeks of 8-bit computer chiptunes, totally nostalgic sounding. Gameplay is fairly smooth and kind of on par with the Spectrum version. The reason I've ranked this version above the Spectrum is simply because it isn't like being on an acid trip whilst playing. Collision detection is pretty solid with this version too. Not a bad version if this is type of Star Wars retro that you like. Imagine that if Micro Machines went Ultra Beast all of a sudden. This Japanese version is what you'd likely end up with. As you can see, sprites are tiny and very uninspired gameplay with this Famicom version too. I did notice that if you don't crouch next to a zombie and punch, they will repeatedly punch you, and they seriously don't give up trying to punch you. Controller wise, this is actually pretty responsive, and it does play pretty well too. It is just a very bizarre version of Altered Beast. Enemies do not explode in body parts in this version, which is understandable. In the early days, Nintendo didn't want to associate itself with violent or overly gory games. Music in this is pretty average for a Famicom game. A very strange choice of colour palette to use in this version. I wouldn't say this was an awfully bad port as such, it is just very different from other conversions. I suppose Nintendo back then were still focusing on predominantly cutesy sprites and characters with little emphasis on more detailed stuff. It's a known fact that Altered Beast isn't the fastest scrolling game ever made, but it was purposely designed this way, and most ports followed this formula. Some in fact go even slower. The IBM PC compatible conversion is kind of like Altered Beast on speed. This is the best visuals the DOS version had, and to be fair, it doesn't look that bad visually. A combination of the beeper music and sound effects which constantly overpowers the music is enough to drive a man insane, after a minute that is. Collision detection appears to be pretty good with this port. I did notice however that a couple of animals did randomly bump into me from time to time, but did not deplete any energy from me. But that is kind of part and parcel of old school games that weren't frequently updated online like we get today. For those who prefer a faster version of Altered Beast but can tolerate beeping, then this port is definitely for you. The Commodore Amiga's conversion, released in 1989 by Activision 2, is a very infuriating play. Teams of zombies, creatures, and hawks will come at you all in one go and leave you fighting for dear life in a corner somewhere. The scrolling pace of this version is acceptable, and it even has a nice opening similar to the original arcade game. No music, just sound effects, which are average for this style game. Visually, I have seen so much better on the Amiga. This is a little on the pixelated side. It is also a version that has gone much darker in contrast compared with most other ports. Collision detection appears to be satisfactory with this port. I actually did not have the patience to go through the full stage because the difficulty level was just ridiculously hard with the Amiga port of this. Really, this conversion is very punishing. It just takes away that whole fun aspect of playing it in the first place. It's not too often that I rank an Atari ST game over an Amiga game, but here we are. This was likely the best home conversion of Altered Beast we got. Why? Firstly, although at times the sound effects drowns out the music, the gameplay is fairly smooth and controllers and collision detection are pretty spot on here. Again, much like the Amiga port, the ST version also has a darker tone, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It looks quite nice. I was fairly impressed with this version. The coders working on this for Activision obviously worked at a faster pace during its development in order to have a half-decent version compared to the other micro ports. Like I say, if there is a micro version you were wanting to play, I think this is likely the best of the bunch. The Sega Master System version is actually mediocre. The main letdown of this is the frame rate. Oddly enough, I had to put up with this version on my Sega Master System back in the day. I asked my mum to buy me Shinobi, but actually came back with this one. I wasn't impressed at the time. Now, many of you watching this might not be aware, but Sega Master System had a sound expansion module, but were more known for this in Japan. This unit was known as an FM sound unit. It had around 50 odds compatible FM games, and Altered Beast was one of them. Okay, so apart from the poor frame rates, characters on screen almost move as bad as the Master System's port of Golden Axe, which can be a little frustrating at times. Visually, I think this is clearly overpixelated, and needless to say, I wasn't a massive fan of this when I was little either. Even with the enhanced sound enabled, I just don't think it is enough to make this any higher up on my list. I had high expectations for the PC Engine CD conversion of Altered Beast, but wasn't overly impressed. Sure, it plays well and looks average for a CD game. The issue that this version suffers is every now and again the game will pause for a second or two, like it's loading more data from the CD. This can get a little frustrating whilst battling out a horde of the undead. I was also expecting some kind of remaster of the music, or at least enhanced sounds, but it just didn't seem to do much. Just seemed like a complete missed opportunity for the developers. Real shame with the PC Engine CD version of this. Virtually the same as the PC Engine CD edition, minus the issue with pausing and skipping. The PC Engine or TurboGrafx-16 port of Altered Beast plays really well, and for an 8-bit console certainly makes the NES port look pointless. The opening of stage 1 is nicely animated with your character coming into the game with the smoke surrounding him. It sounds much like an upgraded 8-bit game compared with other mainstream systems such as the NES and the Master System. It also handles well and seems very easy to hit zombies down too. This port also included zombies exploding where bits of body parts would fly everywhere, which is always a bonus for Altered Beast. Let's not forget, that's just how we should have it. After all, several ports don't include that, and I think this just adds that more to the game. The gameplay handles smooth and screen scrolling moves nicely too with no lag as such. Power up. You all knew that this one was heading to the top spot, but you have seen some versions of this classic in this video in the process which you have likely never seen before. This game was actually the first time I ever played on a Sega Mega Drive. In my local toy shop around 1992, they had a Mega Drive Mark 1 kiosk, and this game was on demonstration. It majorly impressed me at the time, and that really wasn't just young eyes. The truth is, Altered Beast on the Sega Mega Drive or Sega Genesis, which released back in 1990, literally was an arcade perfect version for the living room. Compared with everything in this video, this version, aside from the arcade game, is enjoyable to play. No frustration with slower scrolling screens or zombies that refuses to die. This truly was a staple in the Sega Mega Drive's library, and most had this game when I was a kid. So that's it for today's Altered Beast ports. Let me know in the comments what you think should have been ranked higher, or do you agree with the Mega Drive taking first place in this? Is there actually a arcade game which had many ports that you want to see a video for? Let us know in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching.
Welcome to your doom.